A police dog refused to leave the boy's bed. Days later, the reason broke everyone. Hospitals are built on certainty. Charts, numbers, beeping monitors, things that can be measured, explained. But Orion didn't work with numbers. He worked with something else, something no one could quite name. And that made him dangerous. When he began whining every night at 3:02 a.m., when he scratched the floor, refused to eat, and refused to leave the bedside of a boy in a coma, people thought he was broken or grieving. Then he lunged, straight at the child's ventilator tube. What happened next should have silenced the hospital. But instead, it started a war between medicine and instinct, between protocol and faith, between a mother who refused to give up hope and a dog who'd already seen too many buried before they were gone. This is the true story of what happens when we stop silencing the animals who've been trying to warn us all along. The hallways of Mercy Grace Children's Hospital were a paradox bathed in artificial light, yet always clinging to the hush of a church at midnight. Behind pastel walls painted with smiling animals and floating stars, there was a reverence, as if everyone, nurses, parents, even the machines, understood the fragility of the lives tucked into those hospital beds. Room 211 lay at the far end of the pediatric ICU. The overhead fluorescent hum seemed to dim just outside its door. Inside, 8-year-old Luca slept a sleep that wasn't sleep, a coma of 11 silent days. His body, small and unmoving, was connected to a constellation of machines that beeped, breathed, and whispered statistics in cold confidence. Outside the glass pane, a shadow sat poised like a sentry. Orion, the German shepherd, had been brought in 2 hours earlier for his regular therapy rounds. But tonight, something was different. The moment he stepped onto the ward floor, his movements lost their gentle cadence. He didn't nuzzle the palms of the sleepy children in rooms 205 or 208 like he usually did. He barely acknowledged the nurses who offered him the treats he normally accepted with polite tail wags. He only looked at one door, room 211. Now he stood frozen, his muscular body tense, eyes fixed. His handler, Jonas Gray, crouched beside him with a puzzled frown. "Orion, visit," Jonas said softly, offering the cue the dog had followed hundreds of times before. But the shepherd didn't move. Instead, he emitted a low, rolling growl, barely audible but vibrating through the floor tiles like distant thunder. Then, as the wall clock clicked over to 3:00 a.m., he did something Jonas hadn't seen since the Mexico quake response 4 years ago. Orion barked, once, twice, then a third time sharp, loud, echoing down the corridor. Nurse Kemi Dorsey, reviewing charts at the nurses' station, snapped her head up. "What the—" Jonas stood quickly, tugging Orion's leash, but the dog resisted, planting his paws into the polished tile with military precision. "Shh, boy," Jonas whispered, casting nervous glances. "You're going to wake the floor." But Orion's body was locked forward, gaze pointed at room 211. Then he did something even stranger. He scratched. His nails clicked frantically against the floor, dragging toward the base of the door as though trying to dig. That's when Kemi reached them. "He's never done that before," Jonas murmured. Kemi looked past him at the glass window of 211, where Luca lay still beneath a web of sensors. "Luca's stats haven't changed," she said. "All quiet on the monitors." Jonas squatted beside the shepherd again. "Hey, Orion, hey." He touched the dog's side. "You're not working rubble anymore, buddy. This is a hospital." Orion looked up at him then. It wasn't disobedience in his eyes. It was urgency. Earlier that day, Orion had already started showing signs of unease. He'd refused his usual breakfast boiled chicken with joint supplements. Jonas had chalked it up to nerves, maybe fatigue. Therapy dogs sometimes carried the weight of the places they visited, but this wasn't fatigue. This was purpose, and it had a scent. Orion didn't move when Jonas gently tugged again. Instead, the shepherd lay down directly in front of room 211 and rested his head on his paws, still staring inside. A nurse passing by muttered under her breath, "That dog gives me chills." Another added, "Dogs know things, always have." Kemi returned a few minutes later with an update. Vitals stable, ICP unchanged, no fever, no arrhythmia. We'd know if something was happening. Jonas said nothing, but he knew this posture. This wasn't a therapy dog sitting guard. This was a search dog on a find. By 4 a.m., Jonas made a quiet decision. He would finish the rest of the therapy circuit without Orion. As much as it pained him, he unclipped the dog's lead and whispered, "Stay, watch." 2 words, 2 commands from long ago, and Orion obeyed. He didn't move from that spot. When Jonas returned at 6:30 a.m. with a fresh bowl of food, Orion didn't touch it. He sniffed it once, then turned his head away. Later that morning, in the early golden hours where hope usually filtered through the windows of Mercy Grace, Dr. Rowan Lyle arrived on the floor. Stiff, precise, and always 10 minutes early, she wore her white coat like armor and her experience like a scalpel. She passed room 211 on her morning rounds and paused. There, unmoved, was a 90-pound German shepherd, eyes still locked on her most unresponsive patient. She frowned. "Why is the dog off lead?" Kemi, sipping black coffee from a reusable thermos, replied, "Because if he had his way, he'd be in the bed." Dr. Lyle's jaw tightened. "We don't permit animals unsupervised outside therapy sessions." "He hasn't left since 3 a.m., Kemi added. "Didn't even eat." Lyle glanced inside the room. Machines still beeping. Luca still comatose. Her expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. "I want him removed from the ward until further notice." Jonas, returning just in time to hear it, stepped forward. "With respect, Doctor, I think he's trying to tell us something." Dr. Lyle looked at him. "Then he can learn to use a clipboard." She turned sharply and walked away. Jonas looked down at Orion, still lying still watching. His lips tightened. Something was coming, and this was just the whisper before the storm. Orion was not himself. The shift was subtle to the untrained eye, but Jonas Gray had worked with enough working dogs to sense the difference between a dog that was alert and one that was trying to warn the world. He watched Orion's ears flick, his paws twitch, his entire body a tight wire of tension, not fear, but focus. As if the dog were trying to hold something back and couldn't anymore. It was mid-morning, and the pediatric floor had begun its daily rhythm. Murmured voices, the quiet hum of monitors, parents murmuring over half-drunk coffee. Orion usually moved gracefully through it all, offering comfort like a 4-legged priest. But today, he wouldn't budge from room 211. Jonas tried the cue again, gentle and warm. "Visit, Orion." Orion did move this time, but not toward the other children, not toward the girl in 207 who had once braided his fur with trembling fingers. No. He turned straight into Luca Moreau's room, yanked the leash from Jonas's hand, and trotted with unshakable purpose toward the boy's hospital bed. "Whoa, hey! Orion!" Jonas lunged forward, but it happened fast. One second the German shepherd was at the foot of the bed. The next he was growling low, guttural, the sound of something ancient breaking loose. His body stiffened. He raised his front legs, placed them carefully, almost reverently, on the edge of the metal frame, and bit down. A sharp metallic clank rang through the room, teeth on steel. The sound echoed through the ICU like a fire alarm. "Jesus!" Kemi cried, spilling a tray of gauze as she rushed in. "What is he doing?" Orion didn't bark this time. He held, clamped on the rounded frame beneath Luca's feet, eyes locked not on the staff, not on Jonas, but on Luca himself. His gaze was alive with something that bordered on panic. "Off!" Jonas shouted. "Orion, release!" It took 3 tries. Finally the dog let go and backed off, chest heaving, tail down, not tucked, not ashamed, but as if he were exhausted from trying to make someone understand. Dr. Rowan Lyle was in the room 10 seconds later. Her shoes were silent, but her presence wasn't. "What the hell just happened?" Her voice sliced clean and cold. She took in the overturned tray, the frozen staff, and then the dog. "Did he just bite the bed?" Jonas raised a hand, trying to explain, but Dr. Lyle was already in front of Orion, fury radiating off her white coat. "Get him out, now!" "Wait," Jonas said. "He wasn't attacking. He was signaling. That's how they're trained in the field. He was marking the—" "Do you think this is a debris field?" she snapped. "Do you see rubble and broken rebar? This is a hospital with real patients and rules." She turned to Nurse Kemi. "Was the boy touched?" "No, ma'am," Kemi replied quickly. "Orion didn't go near the tubing or wires. It was just the bed frame." Jonas stepped between them. "Look, I know what it looks like, but I've seen him do this before on the job. He doesn't act out. He alerts. He's trying to say something." Dr. Lyle didn't flinch. "Then let him write a report. In the meantime, he's suspended, effective immediately." The conference room on the 6th floor was as lifeless as the hospital board's policy manual. Cold laminate table, high-backed chairs no one ever got comfortable in. Outside the windows, the Arizona sun scorched the world with dry fire. Inside, Dr. Lyle stood at the head of the table. Jonas sat across from her, arms folded, lips pressed thin. Beside him, Administrator Grant Calloway, dressed in a pressed Navy suit and a faint air of corporate indifference, tapped a pen slowly against the desk. "Mr. Gray," Calloway said, "your therapy dog is supposed to comfort patients, not damage medical property." Jonas leaned forward. "With respect, sir, what he did wasn't aggression. It was behavior drawn from his SAR background. He was trying to alert us to something. I don't think this is just instinct. I think he knows something's wrong with the boy." Dr. Lyle rolled her eyes, but Calloway tilted his head. "You believe the dog is sensing something our machines aren't?" he asked flatly. "Yes," Jonas said. "Luca's vitals may look stable, but Orion's reacting to more than numbers. Dogs like him pick up micro-changes, heart rate, breath patterns, vibrations. He's done it before. In Mexico, he alerted to a trapped child 2 meters beneath concrete before any sensor did." Dr. Lyle folded her arms. "And unless Luca Moreau is 2 meters under rubble, that's irrelevant." A pause. The silence thickened. Calloway finally spoke. "You've worked with Orion for how long?" 5 years. 4 of those in active deployment. He's never had a behavioral mark, never been off duty, until now." Calloway nodded once. "Then we'll treat this as a first and final warning." Jonas looked up. "You have 48 hours, Calloway said. Observe, log, If his behavior escalates, or if there's even a whisper of risk, he's removed permanently. Understood? Jonas glanced at Lyle, her face blank, and then back at the administrator. Understood, he said quietly. But inside, he knew something Lyle didn't. Orion didn't bite that bed because he lost control. He did it because no one was listening. And if they still refused to hear him, then the dog was going to find a way to speak louder. Mira Moreau hadn't slept in 12 days. Not really. Not in the way a body needs, deep and healing. She drifted half-conscious through the antiseptic days and fluorescent nights of Mercy Grace Children's Hospital. Her body sat in the recliner beside Luca's bed, but her soul lived elsewhere. Back on the freeway where the accident happened, in the back seat with her son's laughter echoing off the windows, in the milliseconds before the tires screamed. She hadn't cried in front of anyone, not once. She'd folded her grief into routine. Fresh t-shirts, wet wipes, chapstick for his lips. Every act of care was a refusal. No, he is not gone. No, he is not done. But today, something cracked that armor, and it came with fur. Orion sat curled at the foot of the hallway, his body still a portrait of focus. Mira passed him every day without pause, just another therapy dog. Another piece of well-meaning comfort she didn't have the strength to accept. But this morning, after the biting incident and the meeting Jonas had barely returned from, she noticed something different. He was guarding her son's door, not anyone else's. Her coffee cooled in her hand as she crouched near him, her knees stiff and unforgiving. "Hey," she murmured, voice husky from disuse. Orion didn't flinch. His ears flicked toward her, but his gaze remained inside the room, toward the small, unmoving form beneath the cotton blanket. She glanced through the window. Luca's chest rose and fell, machines humming quietly beside him. Then, a noise. Orion's nose twitched. He leaned forward just slightly, sniffed the air, and whined. It was quiet, barely more than a breath. But Mira felt it as if the dog had spoken directly to her. "What is it?" she asked before she could stop herself. "What do you smell?" She stood and stepped into the room. Jonas looked up from where he was reviewing Orion's observation notes at the far corner of the bed. His face was lined with concern. She ignored him. She went to Luca's overnight bag. A wrinkled, folded t-shirt sat at the bottom, a simple navy blue thing, faded from use. She held it up. A small stain of red juice clung to the collar, the last shirt he wore before the crash. She stepped back out into the hall and crouched again. "Orion," she said softly. This time the shepherd turned, really turned. His eyes met hers, old, amber, knowing. She held out the shirt. The second it reached his nose, he surged forward, not violently, not frantic, but drawn, like a compass finding true north. He sniffed it in small, desperate bursts, then looked up at her, his eyes wide. "You know this," she whispered. He licked the shirt once, then lay his head on her knee, pressing his body into her like gravity itself had shifted. Mira's breath caught. She fumbled for her phone. Her fingers trembled as she unlocked it and opened the photo album she hadn't touched since the accident. Scroll, scroll, scroll. And there it was. A photo taken just 4 months earlier at Willow Creek Elementary. The school had hosted a Safety Hero Day. Firefighters, paramedics, police dogs. And there, in the middle of a sunlit courtyard, stood Luca, his arm wrapped around a massive German shepherd. Luca's grin was lopsided, missing a front tooth. His hair was windblown. On his shirt was a sticker that read "Future Rescue Hero." The dog? Same amber eyes, same markings, same intelligent stare. Orion. "Oh my God," Mira breathed. She showed the screen to Jonas, who'd walked over silently. He blinked. "That was one of our school demo visits." "My son," Mira swallowed. "He talked about that dog for days, said he wanted to be like him when he grew up." Jonas crouched beside her, staring at the image. "Sometimes, when the bond is strong enough," he said, "they remember." Orion hadn't moved. His head was still resting gently on Mira's lap, the shirt beneath his muzzle like a sacred object. Mira exhaled a shaky breath, and something inside her broke. Not the grief. That had already shattered her long ago. What broke now was the silence. The wall she had built to keep herself from hoping again. Her hand moved, instinctive, trembling, to Orion's fur. She stroked his neck. "I thought you were just a dog," she whispered. "But you're his dog, aren't you?" A single tear slid down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. That evening Jonas made a note in his observation log. 5:47 p.m. Orion confirmed prior connection to patient via school visit photo. Strong behavioral response to scent of patient's shirt. Showed no signs of aggression. Emotional bonding with patient's mother appears mutually beneficial. Recommend continued supervised presence outside room 211. Back inside the room, Mira placed the T-shirt on Luca's chest, folding it neatly beneath his pale fingers. She didn't speak, but Orion lay back down in his usual spot outside the door. And this time, she stayed with him. The monitors told one story, but Nurse Kemi Dorsey's gut whispered another. It was a little after 2:40 a.m. when she sat at the nurse's station on the pediatric ICU floor, half-drained coffee cooling by her keyboard. Mercy Grace Children's Hospital ran quiet at that hour, too quiet. The kind of quiet that made her skin itch. Not loud enough to alert, not calm enough to trust. Kemi was not the kind of nurse who jumped at shadows. She had trained at South Shore General, worked ER for 6 years, and once kept a toddler alive through a full-blown anaphylactic collapse with no doctor in the room. But what she felt now didn't come from medicine. It came from watching a dog. She glanced down the hallway. Orion hadn't moved from his post outside room 211. His large body lay still, ears forward, nose aimed at the base of Luca Moreau's door. But then it started again. That shift. His body stiffened. He stood not all the way, but enough that Kemi noticed. A low, rough growl vibrated in his throat. It wasn't threatening, it was warning. She turned her attention back to the telemetry screen on the monitor hub. Luca's vitals, heart rate, 78 BPM. Respiration, 16. SpO2, 98%. Intracranial pressure, unchanged. No alarms, no red lights. Just numbers doing what they were supposed to do. And yet, Kemi leaned closer. A dip. Tiny. Barely half a beat's worth of disruption in the waveform, then back to baseline. "Did you see that?" she murmured aloud, even though no one was around. It could have been an artifact, a sensor adjustment, the machine sneezing. But Orion had moved just before it happened. She scribbled a quick timestamp on her notepad. 2:41 a.m. Slight dip in HR. 1.8 seconds. Dog reacted. Growl observed. She didn't know what she was documenting, only that her instincts told her not to dismiss it. Again. By 3:06 a.m., Orion had settled, but he remained upright. His eyes tracked the door like it might vanish if he blinked. Kemi stood and walked quietly toward him, her tennis shoes squeaking faintly against the tile. She crouched down, careful to keep her voice low. "You see something I don't, boy?" she asked, half smiling. Orion didn't look at her. Didn't need to. His focus said enough. Morning light crept into the ward hours later, gold filtering through frosted windows like a hesitant guest. Jonas Gray arrived earlier than usual, his expression tight, his eyes still carrying the weight of yesterday's meeting. Kemi caught him near the break room, intercepting him with a quiet urgency. "Jonas, got a minute?" He followed her back to the station, setting his coffee down before it reached his lips. "What's up?" Kemi opened her chart, pulled out the sticky note she'd written at 2:41 a.m., and laid it in front of him. "I need to ask you something serious," she said. "Off the record." He arched an eyebrow. "That's always a good sign." She didn't smile. When Orion gets like that, growling low, alert, what is he actually doing? What's it mean? Jonas exhaled slowly, looking down at the note. "It depends," he said. "In a crowd, it might mean he senses aggression. In a disaster zone, it usually means he's picked up a life sign breath, movement, heat, something the gear missed." Kemi nodded. "Last night he did it again. Around 2:41 a.m., I was watching Luca's stats. They were normal, but there was this blip, barely a whisper, just something out of rhythm." "You think it was real?" "I think he reacted before I did. And I've been staring at these monitors long enough to know what's noise and what's not." Jonas looked toward the hallway. Orion was back in his spot, ears down now, body resting, but his eyes still open, watching. "He's not eating," Jonas murmured. "Second day now." Kemi looked at him sharply. "That's not like him?" "Not at all. If he's not taking food, he's in working mode, hyper-focus, and that only happens when he thinks there's still a job to do." They were both quiet for a moment. Then Kemi said, "I didn't want to believe it before. That he was sensing something about Luca. I chalked it up to coincidence. And now?" Kemi tapped the note again. "Now I'm not so sure. I've been a nurse for a long time, Jonas. I've seen machines miss things, but I've also seen dogs sit outside a room and refuse to leave the spot until someone took a second look." Jonas stared at the clock. 2:41 a.m. "How many other notes like this do you have?" Kemi flipped her chart open and pulled 3 more Post-its from inside the folder, each with times, each within minutes of Orion growling or sitting upright. "Enough," she said. "To think this isn't a coincidence anymore." Jonas picked them up. His thumb ran over the ink, slowly. "Would you mind if I started logging these officially?" he asked. "In his behavior file." "I was hoping you would," Kemi replied. "I think he's watching what we can't." That night, Jonas stayed late. He sat across the hall from room 211 with a small notepad on his knee. Orion lay by the door, his back straight against the wall. Neither of them moved much. They didn't need to. They were waiting for the next shadow. 2:57 a.m. The world was whispering again. Inside room 211, the machines kept their rhythm, beep, sigh, click, as if trying to convince the world that silence meant safety. But Mira Moreau had stopped trusting the sound of machines days ago. They could sing lullabies of stability while her son drifted further from her, breath by breath. She sat by the window now, blanket draped over her shoulders, eyes swollen but dry. She hadn't cried since the photo. Since Orion. The German shepherd lay curled on the floor beside Luca's hospital bed, his body a question mark drawn in fur and muscle. His leash, once clipped firmly to the hallway doorframe, had been quietly left slack after Mira insisted. "He's not hurting anyone," she told the nurse on duty. "Let him be where he needs to be." Orion hadn't moved for nearly an hour, not even when Jonas came in earlier and tried gently to call him back to his usual position in the corridor. "Not tonight," Jonas had said, shaking his head. "He's planted, like stone." Mira didn't argue. She didn't know the rules anymore, only that something in her was beginning to thaw, and it was happening in rhythm with every time that dog chose her son over protocol. 2:59 a.m. Orion's breathing changed. It wasn't loud, just deeper, sharper, as if each inhale was decoding something Mira couldn't hear. He lifted his head, ears forward, body tense, but still like he was listening with more than hearing. Then the whine came, low, drawn out, almost mournful, and directed at Luca. Mira's hand gripped the arm of the chair. "What is it?" she whispered. Orion didn't answer. Of course he didn't. But he moved. He got to his feet with a grace that belied his size and stepped forward until his paws touched the side of the hospital bed. He didn't jump up, didn't bark, just stood there, watching. Then he lay down again, this time touching the bed. His body curled close, his head resting beside Luca's arm. A silent promise carved in stillness. Mira stood slowly, crossing to his side. The floor was cold under her socks. Her robe dragged softly. She knelt beside him and reached for his fur, smoothing it back gently. "You know something, don't you?" she whispered. "I can feel it." Orion let out another breath, slow and deep, and pressed his nose to the T-shirt Luca had once worn, the one Mira had folded and placed under her son's pillow. He hadn't left it alone since. At exactly 3:00 a.m., a small shift occurred. Luca's right index finger, still, pale, lifeless, for 11 days, twitched. Not a full movement, not a command, just a tremor. But Mira saw it. Her breath caught. She turned sharply to the monitor, looking for confirmation. Nothing. Numbers unchanged, machines still pulsing their quiet chorus. Then she looked down at Orion. He was whining again. "Jonas," she whispered aloud, "you need to see this." Jonas arrived 20 minutes later, wearing yesterday's shirt and eyes that hadn't seen sleep. He entered quietly, holding his breath, as if afraid a sound might break something sacred. Mira didn't greet him. She only pointed to the floor. "He hasn't left that spot in hours," she said. "He won't eat, barely drinks, but every time Luca's hand twitches, even a little Orion whines, just once, same every night." Jonas crossed the room, crouched next to the dog, and looked at his face. "Locked in," he murmured. "Working posture." "He's not sleeping," Mira said. "He just closes his eyes and listens." Jonas placed a hand on Orion's head. "You think he's guarding the boy?" "No," Mira said quietly. "I think he's trying to reach him." They sat in silence for a long time, the three of them, woman, handler, dog. The only sound was the wind rattling the blinds and the steady, oblivious beeping of monitors that recorded everything except what mattered. At 4:10 a.m., Mira began to cry. Not the sobbing kind, just silent tears tracking down her cheeks like something finally unsealing. She didn't move to hide them. "He's still in there," she said, her voice breaking like glass. "I feel it, not because of the machines, because Orion won't leave, and I don't think he would stay for someone already gone." Jonas said nothing. What could he say? She was right. By sunrise, the nurses rotated shifts. Kemi Dorsey arrived with a thermos and a clipboard, eyes landing first on the dog curled beside the bed, then on the woman watching him like he was the last candle still lit. "Still no movement?" she asked gently. Mira shook her head. "Only in the right hand. 2 twitches. Subtle. But enough." Kemi scribbled in the log, then looked at Jonas. "He's not just alerting anymore." "No," Jonas said. "He's waiting." The meeting was held behind closed doors, not because of confidentiality, though that was the excuse, but because emotions, when they run this high, don't belong in hallways. Dr. Rowan Lyle sat at the head of the consultation table, his spine as straight as his pressed collar, fingers laced together in a steeple beneath his chin. The blinds behind him filtered the morning sun into a grid of pale lines across the floor. It made the room feel clinical, measured, like every word would be weighed before allowed in. Across from him sat Jonas Gray, not in uniform today, but still wearing the stance of a man who'd rather be standing. His boots scuffed the linoleum, and his arms remained crossed tightly, not in defense, but restraint. To the side, Mira Moreau sat quietly, one hand gripping a file folder, the other clenched in her lap. Her presence had not been invited, but she came anyway, and no one dared ask her to leave. "I've reviewed the footage," Lyle began, his voice cool. 3 nights in a row, your dog, the therapy animal has ignored direct orders to remain outside patient rooms. Jonas didn't blink. "He wasn't harming anyone?" "He bit a bed frame, Mr. Gray. He barked during sedation cycles. He's refused food, defied leash protocol, and compromised sterile boundaries. That is a liability, not a legacy." Jonas leaned forward slightly. "And yet every time he reacts, something changes in Luca's vitals. Coincidence? Correlation is not causation. And causation doesn't wait for peer review." That silenced the room for a second. Then Lyle sighed, pushing his chair back an inch. "This is a hospital, not a kennel. We do not gamble with lives based on instinct, no matter how noble the animal." "And what if instinct is what's keeping him alive?" Mira's voice cut through the room like glass. Not loud, but piercing. Lyle turned to her. "Ms. Moreau, I understand how emotionally fraught this is." "No, you don't." She stood. Her voice trembled, but not from weakness. "I've watched Orion sleep by my son's bed every night. I've seen him alert seconds before Luca twitched. I've seen him refuse food, but not proximity. If there was nothing to sense, he wouldn't be doing any of this." "Mira," Lyle began. "No, let her speak," Jonas said quietly. She held up the photo Luca, beaming, his arms around Orion's neck, a moment from a school safety drill months before the accident. "You think this is coincidence?" she whispered. "That he just happened to pick my son's room to lose control in? Orion knows him. Maybe not in the way you recognize in a scan, but in the way dogs remember scent, tone, fear." Lyle didn't answer. He looked tired suddenly, like he'd spent too long arguing logic in a room full of ghosts. Jonas leaned forward. "Give me 48 hours. Lyle blinked. "Excuse me?" 2 days. If you still think Orion is compromising care, I'll pull him myself. No press, no incident. But until then, let us track what he's doing. Logs, footage, cross-reference everything with Luca's data. Let's prove you're right." "Or prove you are?" Lyle asked flatly. Jonas didn't flinch. "Either way, Luca wins." Silence. Then, "This sets a dangerous precedent. And so does ignoring what we don't understand." Lyle stood. The blinds behind him now cast shadows across his face. "48 hours," he said tightly, "but full supervision. That dog steps out of line once he's gone." Jonas stood too. Understood. Lyle looked at Mira, softer now, but still clinical. "I hope you understand we are trying to help." She met his gaze. "Then listen to the only one who seems to be hearing my son." Outside the meeting room, Jonas exhaled hard, rolling his shoulders like shaking off armor. Mira walked beside him in silence until they reached the hallway just outside room 211. Orion was there, as always, unmoved. Jonas dropped to a knee and placed a hand on the dog's chest. "Clock's ticking, buddy," he murmured. "You've got 48 hours to prove what the rest of us already feel." Mira knelt beside him. "He doesn't need time," she said. "He just needs us to stop wasting it." It was just past 6 a.m., but the sky outside Mercy Grace was already bruising with heat clouds, the color of fading bruises pressed against the glass. In the staff courtyard, tucked behind the east wing, Mira sat across from Jonas at a rusted metal table, her fingers curled around a steaming cup of hospital coffee she had no intention of drinking. Orion lay at their feet, unmoving but alert, his ears twitching every time someone passed through the automatic doors behind them. He hadn't left Luca's hallway since the agreement. Not for water, not for food, not even for this brief breath of open air. Jonas had to coax him out with a firm voice and a clipped command. He only came because he trusted the man giving the order. "You said he used to work search and rescue?" Mira asked, her voice low, like she was afraid of disturbing something sacred. "Earthquakes?" Jonas nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Yeah, Mexico City, back in 19... We partnered with international teams after the second quake flattened part of the East District." Mira shifted forward. "How old was he?" "Barely 2. Young for deployment, but he passed evils with top instinct scores. He could scent live bodies from under 6 meters of concrete. But that wasn't what made him special." Jonas looked down at Orion, his voice softening like it always did when speaking to the past. He could feel it. Feel what? Vibration. Not just the big shifts, the micro ones. Children especially move differently under rubble. Their panic is smaller, quieter. But he'd hear it or sense it. We never figured out exactly how, but when Orion stopped and planted, we dug. Mira looked at the dog as if seeing a ghost in daylight. "And did you find them?" Jonas exhaled. 16 kids, in 3 weeks. The youngest was 4. She was trapped in a stairwell void so tight a camera drone missed her. But Orion wouldn't move. He lay down and wouldn't leave. Mira's voice cracked. "Like he's doing now." Jonas nodded. "That's why I didn't yank him after the bite. Because I've seen that posture before. He isn't misbehaving. He's alerting. But there's no debris this time, no smoke, just sterile walls and beeping screens." Mira's hand trembled on the coffee cup. "Jonas, what if—" Her voice stopped. She swallowed. Then started again, slower. "What if Luca's body is here, but part of him is trapped somewhere else?" Jonas met her eyes. "You mean neurologically?" "No," she whispered. "I mean, somewhere only Orion can feel." A breeze stirred the courtyard trees, brittle and dry like old bones. Mira set the cup down carefully. "I trained dogs once, years ago, before I went into early childhood therapy. I helped run a tracking program for displaced children in post-hurricane shelters. They were trained to locate fear scent, elevated cortisol, adrenaline. That smell children leave behind when they're terrified. It's specific. Jonas raised his eyebrows. Mira nodded. And Orion? When he presses his nose to Luca's pillow? He's not just recognizing a scent. He's tracking something. Jonas sat back, slowly processing. You think he believes Luca is buried? Her eyes welled. Yes, but not in dirt, not under rubble, inside himself. Somewhere Orion can't reach unless we help him dig. Orion stirred at her feet, lifting his head and letting out a low, quiet whine. Mira reached down, fingers brushing his thick ruff of fur. I know that sound, she said, voice tight. It's not pain, it's frustration. He knows something's wrong, but we keep looking at machines and scans. What if he's the only one actually listening to Luca? Jonas looked at her then, not just as a grieving mother, but as someone who saw the same thread of instinct in Orion he had once trusted with his life. And what do we do with that? He asked. Mira answered without hesitation. We believe him. A few minutes passed in silence, broken only by the distant hum of ambulance engines and the chirp of a pager from inside. Then Jonas spoke, almost to himself. You know, on that last day in Mexico, Orion alerted on a stretch of collapsed parking garage no one had assigned him to. We didn't dig. It wasn't in our sector, but he wouldn't move. Cried for hours. I had to leash him away. Mira's voice barely rose above a whisper. Did they ever go back? Jonas stared out over the courtyard. No. The report said it was clear. A beat. Then, but he never worked the same after that. Inside room 211, machines still hummed. Luca remained still. A boy held in the silence of his own mind. But something else was beginning to stir now. Not in his body, in the people who surrounded him. They were starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, Orion wasn't waiting for the boy to wake up. He was trying to dig him out. The hallway outside room 211 had grown quieter in the past 12 hours. Not because there was less concern, but because people had started to walk slower, speak softer, watch closer. Something about the air around Luca Moreau's hospital room had changed, and at the center of that shift was Orion. He hadn't moved from his post beside Luca's bed since returning from the courtyard. His body curled but alert. Every few hours he would rise, pace a half circle around the bed frame, then return to the exact same spot near the boy's head. Eyes fixed, ears forward, breath shallow but steady, as if listening to something no one else could hear. Mira entered the room first that evening, followed closely by Jonas. The machines still whispered their relentless rhythm, heart rate, oxygen, neural activity. All stable, all normal. Too normal. But Orion, he didn't agree. He raised his head before they even crossed the threshold, tail twitching once before falling still. Mira walked past him slowly, brushing her fingertips over his back. He didn't flinch, didn't move, just kept staring at Luca. Jonas exhaled. He's never held a lock this long. Mira didn't respond. She was watching Orion now, truly watching. Not as a handler, not as a therapist, but as someone trying to remember what the silence between barks had once meant. She closed the door gently behind her, then whispered, "Let me try something." Jonas gave her space. She crouched down to Orion's level, pressing one hand to the cool hospital floor, the other resting over her own chest, like trying to still her own pulse. I haven't used this word in years, she murmured, mostly to herself. Back when we trained scent hounds to fix on source markers in hurricane zones. Orion tilted his head slightly. Mira looked at him, their eyes locked. Then she said it, firm, low, precise. Watch. Orion reacted instantly, not like a dog startled, but like a soldier receiving an order. His body surged upright, tense but still. He stepped forward, closing the space between him and Luca's bed in one calculated motion. Then he sat, not slumped but poised. His eyes locked on the boy's face like a sentinel waiting for movement. His breathing slowed, his tail stilled. Every muscle in his body said one thing: target found. Stand by. Jonas stared, something cold crawling down his spine. That's a trained alert, he said softly. That's not instinct. That's protocol. Mira nodded, eyes filling with tears. He was waiting for permission. They both turned to Orion again. He didn't budge, didn't blink. His gaze never wavered from Luca's face. The beeping machines carried on like clockwork, but they were no longer the trusted narrative. The dog was. Jonas stepped forward. I've seen this before. Earthquake drill, Sector 9. Orion pinned a stairwell for hours, no sound, no signals. Everyone said it was clean. He didn't move. We finally broke protocol and dug. Found a 6-year-old unconscious under a slab of marble. Mira whispered, because he was watching. For a moment, time folded in on itself. In this sterile, fluorescent-lit room, Mira saw two realities overlapping. The one where Luca was comatose, machines calling him stable, and another where her son was screaming under layers of silence, unheard by anything human. But not by Orion. Orion heard everything. She crouched beside the dog again, hand hovering near his chest but not touching. You remember him, don't you? Orion didn't react. He just stayed locked on. She pulled something from her purse, a photo she now carried with her always. Luca at the school's safety fair, his arms around Orion, teeth missing in that lopsided grin, cheeks flushed from the sun. It was one of the last full smiles Mira had captured before the accident. She held it up beside Luca's face. Orion's gaze flicked just once from the boy to the image, then back again. Mira's voice cracked. You knew he was yours before we did. Jonas stepped toward the nurse call button, then stopped. No, not yet, he said. Let's document this first. He grabbed his phone, opened the hospital's approved log app, and began recording footage of Orion locked in that unshakable stance. Date, time, behavior response. Command word, watch. Duration of alert begins now. Mira stood, wiping her face with the sleeve of her sweater. Do you think Dr. Lyle will care? Jonas gave a dry smile. Not until it saves someone's life. Then he looked at Orion again, so still, so loyal it hurt to watch. But maybe that's closer than we think. At exactly 3:03 a.m., 3 hours later, Orion broke the posture on his own. He stood, circled the bed once, then laid back down beneath Luca's feet, his body touching the edge of the mattress, just enough to be felt. Jonas looked at the timestamp on his phone. Same hour, same minute, same pattern, but now they had something different, proof, or at least the beginning of it. The conference room on the second floor of Mercy Grace Children's Hospital wasn't made for tension, but it carried it well. Its white walls too clean, its chairs too stiff, its fluorescent lights hummed with just enough anxiety to remind everyone they weren't here to breathe easy. Jonas Gray sat at the far end of the polished table, hands folded, calm on the outside. Mira Moreau sat beside him, the photo of Luca and Orion clutched in her hand like evidence in a murder trial. Her eyes were tired, but not dimmed. They had sharpened into something else now. Determination. Across from them sat Dr. Rowan Lyle, head of pediatric neurology. White coat crisp, tie perfectly knotted. His glasses never once slipped from the bridge of his nose. He flipped through the printed reports Jonas had submitted. Timestamps, behavioral notes, stills from the surveillance cameras, and a short video showing Orion responding to Mira's command. Watch. Lyle didn't flinch, didn't frown, just read. Then he closed the folder with a soft thud. "This is a hospital," he said flatly. "Not a kennel, and certainly not a stage for emotional projection." Mira straightened. "Dr. Lyle—" "No," he said, not raising his voice, but slicing through hers with practiced efficiency. "I'm sure you're both convinced your interpretation of Orion's behavior is meaningful. But what you see as intuition or intelligence, I see as conditioned response with no clinical relevance." Jonas didn't blink. He identified a patient in distress repeatedly before monitors picked it up. "And what you fail to account for," Lyle countered, "is confirmation bias. Humans are pattern-seeking, especially when grief clouds the lens." Silence. Mira glanced to her left. Dr. Elia Navarro had entered quietly during the back and forth. The neurologist leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She had said nothing since arriving. Jonas tried again. "He's not barking at shadows, Doctor. He's alerting with consistency, on cue. The watch command triggered a stance that's recognized in SAR protocols. You know his background. Mexico earthquakes. Trained to detect trapped survivors based on biological signals. Not sound, not heat. Vibrations. Heart rate. He's responding the way he was trained." Lyle's face remained calm, clinical. "I respect your background, Mr. Gray, I do. But this is a world of peer-reviewed metrics, of measurable, replicable outcomes. You're asking me to divert clinical resources based on what amounts to a dog's stare and a grieving mother's instinct." He turned toward Mira then. "And you, Ms. Moreau, are still raw, understandably. But emotional turbulence is not a diagnostic tool." Mira's fingers clenched around the photo. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She simply said, "He knew Luca before the coma." That gave Lyle pause. Not enough to shift, but enough for Jonas to press in. "She showed me a photo," Jonas said. "School safety fair. Luca and Orion, months before the accident." Lyle nodded once, unimpressed. "Children see dogs every day. Familiarity does not imply clairvoyance." Then Dr. Navarro finally spoke, quietly, carefully. "But it does imply recognition." Everyone turned toward her. She stepped into the room, her tone calm, but not cold. Her eyes, scientific, curious, not yet convinced, but no longer closed. "Elia," Lyle began. "I've reviewed the surveillance footage," she said, voice level, "including the incidents where Orion barked prior to micro-seizure spikes. I'm not making assumptions, but I am interested." Jonas exhaled slowly. Navarro continued, walking toward the table and gently laying a small folder in front of her. "I've been running cross-references between Orion's reactions and Luca's EEG data. There are patterns not definitive, but consistent enough to warrant observation." Lyle didn't hide his displeasure. You want to turn this into a study? I want to understand what's happening, Navarro replied, because if we're wrong, then we learn something. But if we're right, she glanced at Mira, then maybe a dog just told us more than $1 million monitor. Another silence, this one heavier. Lyle leaned back in his chair, lips pressed into a line. This sets a dangerous precedent. Navarro nodded. So does ignoring what doesn't fit the algorithm. The tension became almost unbearable. Then Lyle stood. Fine, he said. Continue your observations. But this is off the record. No media, no internal memos, and no guarantees of protocol exemption. He turned to Jonas. The dog stays out of direct patient contact. One more incident like the bite, and I won't debate again. He left without another word. When the door shut, Mira finally exhaled. Navarro looked at her, softer now. You're not wrong to believe what you believe, but belief alone isn't enough for this place. Let's build the data, quietly, carefully. Jonas nodded. We'll keep it clean. Navarro gave the faintest smile. Just give me something they can't ignore. She left them with that. Jonas looked at Mira. We've got a crack in the wall. Mira looked at the photo in her hand again. No, she whispered. We've got a door. The desert storm rolled in like a breath held too long. Outside the windows of Mercy Grace Children's Hospital, the sky boiled with dust and distant lightning. The lights inside flickered once, then steadied. A hush settled over the pediatric ward, as if even the walls were bracing for something unspoken. It was 2:56 a.m. Room 211 remained dim, save for the soft green and blue glow of vitals monitors, casting long shadows across the boy in the bed. Luca lay still, skin pale beneath the faint glow. Tubes and machines hummed their artificial lullaby. And beside him, on the floor, was Orion. He hadn't moved in hours. Jonas had curled up on the vinyl chair by the window, half asleep, Mira sitting cross-legged on the floor with her back to the wall. Her hand rested lightly on Orion's back, as if anchoring herself to something still alive. Then, a growl, low, primal, the kind that doesn't ask for attention. It demands it. Mira's hand snapped off his fur. Orion stood, hackles raised, eyes locked on the side of Luca's bed. Jonas jolted awake. What is it? Before anyone could answer, Orion lunged. His paws slammed against the side of the hospital bed with a metallic clang, teeth snapping at the rail just inches from the clear tubing that connected to Luca's tracheostomy. Orion, no! Jonas shouted, rushing toward him. But the dog didn't attack. He didn't growl at anyone in the room. He didn't even look at Jonas. He barked 3 times, sharp, alarmed, and then he pawed frantically at the space below the monitor tower, nose driving toward the connection site of the breathing tube. The door slammed open. Nurse Kemi burst in, wide-eyed. What the? Behind her, a night tech stumbled in with a flashlight in hand. Power was flickering again. Mira dropped to her knees beside the bed. Jonas, hold him back, but don't stop him, please. Jonas grabbed Orion's collar, holding him steady, but allowing his nose to inch toward the base of the respirator. Orion whined, then barked again, one short panicked sound. That's when Kemi saw it. Oh my God, he's right. She leaned in, fingers trembling slightly as she traced the breathing tube where it met the child's throat. The connector ring had come loose, just enough to let air leak, but not enough to trigger the monitor's alarm yet. A few more minutes, and Luca would have slipped under, silent. unnoticed. Kemi's voice broke. It was about to fail. The flashlight beam from the tech wobbled over the tube, revealing a slick film of condensation pooling where it shouldn't be. Jonas felt Orion go still beneath his grip, as if he too had sensed the danger pass, but no one else moved. Mira sat frozen, one hand over her mouth, the other clenched around the edge of the bed. Orion licked Luca's hand once. Kemi whispered, "He saved him." 10 minutes later, the emergency team had recalibrated the machine and double-secured the tube. Dr. Lyle arrived midway through the commotion, lips tight, eyes scanning the scene like a man trying to find logic in a dream. Dr. Navarro stood in the hallway, having arrived moments after the alert. She didn't go in at first, just watched through the glass as Orion curled up again at Luca's side, his body coiled tight like a wire still charged. She turned to Lyle. "You still think this is coincidence?" Lyle didn't answer. Navarro didn't wait. She stepped inside. Mira was standing now, one hand resting on the bed's footrail. She looked at Navarro with tear-streaked cheeks but steady eyes. "You told us to give you something you couldn't ignore," she said softly. "Well, he just did." Navarro nodded, slowly. Then her gaze drifted to Orion. The dog lifted his head just slightly and looked straight at her. It wasn't the gaze of an animal waiting for orders. It was the gaze of someone asking, "Are you finally listening?" Morning had not yet arrived, but the hallway outside room 211 glowed with the light of consequence. The storm outside had passed, but inside Mercy Grace Children's Hospital the atmosphere felt heavier thick with what almost happened. Dr. Rowan Lyle stood with his arms folded, a folder of overnight incident reports pressed tight to his chest like a shield. His tie was askew, his voice had gone quiet, and for once he wasn't leading the conversation. Inside the room, Jonas crouched beside Orion, checking his paws for splinters from last night's frantic episode. The dog was calm now, silent, but not relaxed. His eyes followed every movement near the bed, ears twitching at each beep of the monitors. Mira sat at the edge of Luca's mattress, her fingers gently combing his hair. Her face was pale from exhaustion, but the tension in her shoulders had softened. She looked anchored, like she'd finally been given something solid to hold on to after weeks of drifting. Dr. Elia Navarro entered quietly, scanning the room before addressing anyone. Her clipboard was tucked under one arm, but she didn't glance at it. "I read the respiratory report. The disconnection wasn't detected by the system. No pressure alarm, no monitor spike." Lyle cleared his throat. "I saw it too." He stepped inside, his presence bringing with it a chill of resistance, as if he still wanted to dispute the event, but the ground beneath his doubt had eroded. "No system's perfect," he added, trying to reassert logic. "Faulty tubing, miscalibrated thresholds." "He barked before the readings dropped," Navarro cut in, calm but unwavering. Lyle paused. "That doesn't change the fact that this is a hospital. We rely on data, not animals." Mira didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "He tried to warn us," she said simply. "Days ago." She didn't look at Lyle when she said it. She looked at her son, still sleeping, chest rising and falling with mechanical precision. Lyle shifted on his feet, caught between defensiveness and something far more unfamiliar, shame. Navarro stepped closer to Orion and bent down until she was level with his face. The dog didn't flinch. He only blinked slowly, his breathing measured. "I've reviewed his behavioral records, Jonas," she said. "From his search and rescue deployments, from the therapy sessions, not a single incident until last week." Jonas nodded. Navarro stood up and turned to Lyle. "I'm putting it in writing. My professional recommendation, Orion remains. Under observation, yes, but also with clinical permission to stay bedside. Lyle's jaw tightened. You're making an emotional decision. No, Navarro said evenly. I'm making a human one. There was a silence so sharp it felt like glass in the air. Jonas rose to his feet. We don't want to be right, he said, looking at both doctors. We just want to help Luca. That's all. Mira spoke again, voice nearly a whisper. You know what the scariest thing is about all this? It's not that the machines failed. It's that we almost didn't listen to the only one who knew. Lyle's eyes flicked toward Orion, who was now resting his chin near Luca's arm. The boy's fingers had twitched again during the night, not enough to call it movement, but enough to feel like something was trying to break through. I want hourly logs, Lyle muttered at last. Video recordings. All behavior documented. Of course, Navarro said. He turned to leave but hesitated at the door, then said without looking back, If something happens again, I want to be called. And then he was gone. Navarro remained a moment longer, watching the quiet harmony in the room, the boy, the dog, the mother, the man beside them all. No fanfare, no applause, just breath and silence. She pulled out her phone and typed a note to herself. Case log number 17, initiate study parameters, observational metrics begin at 08 Unqua. Preliminary conclusion. Orion is not malfunctioning. He is interpreting something we are not trained to detect. Then she looked up and smiled, just slightly. Let's listen better this time. The clock on the wall read 9:42 p.m. The hum of the fluorescent lights above room 211 was softer tonight, like even the hospital itself was holding its breath. A cot had been rolled into the corner. It creaked under the weight of Andre Moreau, who sat upright, elbows on knees, hands laced together like he was preparing for confession. He hadn't wanted to stay, hadn't wanted to believe. But after the breathing tube incident, after Mira's voice cracked for the first time in weeks, and after watching Orion flatten himself to the floor the moment Luca stirred, he knew he couldn't keep ignoring it. The man who once said, "It's just a dog, Mira," now found himself staring at that dog as though Orion held a key to something even the doctors had missed. Orion didn't sleep. He lay curled in a tight crescent on the floor, eyes fixed on the boy above. Every rise of Luca's chest, every shift in the monitor's pitch, every fractional pause in the ventilator's rhythm, Orion noticed. He didn't bark. He didn't move. But his ears would flick. His eyes would narrow. His entire body seemed to listen. Mira sat in a chair on the opposite side of the bed, barefoot, wrapped in a hospital blanket. Her hand rested gently on her son's ankle beneath the sheets. It had become a habit, as if her touch alone could anchor him here. "Do you remember the safety drill at Crescent Ridge Elementary?" she asked softly, voice barely above the sound of the IV drip. Andre looked over. "The earthquake simulation?" She nodded. They had search dogs come in. Show the kids how rescues worked. Luca talked about it for days, said one of the dogs licked his shoe and wouldn't stop following him around the gym. Andre's brow furrowed. "You think it was him?" "I showed Orion the old shirt from that day." He went still, then he sniffed it again like it meant something, like it wasn't just scent. And then he did that thing he does now, sat at attention, eyes locked, like a soldier waiting for an order. Andre didn't speak for a long time. Finally he said, "I wanted to protect him, and now I have to accept that someone else is doing it better." Mira looked over. It's not better, it's just different. Orion is doing what he was trained to do, and maybe what he was meant to do. Andre exhaled. His shoulders sagged as if setting down a weight he hadn't known he carried. Across the room, Orion stirred. Not sharply, just enough to raise his head. His nose lifted slightly, testing the air. He turned toward Luca, ears pointed, muscles tensed. Then he relaxed again. The monitors hadn't changed. No alarms, no lights, just Orion, reading something invisible. "What did you see, boy?" Andre asked under his breath. No answer came, but the room didn't need one. The hours slipped by. At 2:47 a.m., Luca's breathing hitched barely, not enough to set off alerts. But Andre had been watching Orion, not the machines. The dog sat up straight, body rigid, not alarmed, just ready. Andre stood and crossed to the side of the bed. He watched his son's face, the faintest movement beneath his closed eyelids. A twitch, like a dream had brushed too close to waking. Then calm again. Mira hadn't noticed her head rested sideways against the bed's edge, finally asleep. Her lips still touched the back of Luca's hand. Andre whispered, "You saw it again, didn't you?" Orion blinked. The rest of the night passed in murmurs and soft light. By 5 o'clock a.m., Andre was seated on the floor beside Orion, back against the wall. The dog's warmth pressed near his leg, a surprising comfort for someone who'd once refused to let Luca adopt a hamster, much less a dog. "You're not just guarding him," Andre said. "You're listening for him." He looked up at the bed. "My son has always been quiet, always internal. He doesn't like to explain what he's feeling. But you, somehow you already know." Orion made no sound, just leaned into the man's leg, tail thudding once, slow and solid. Andre smiled faintly. When the sun rose, golden light crept through the blinds and spilled across the room. Luca remained asleep. But something was different. His fingers twitched beneath the blanket, slower this time, but deliberate. His brows furrowed, just slightly. A sound came from his throat, not a word, not even a murmur, but a vibration, a flicker of life. Mira sat up, startled. She looked at Orion, who was already standing. "Did he?" Andre nodded. "He's still fighting." Later that morning, as nurses returned with fresh charts and coffee in paper cups, Jonas arrived at the door. He paused, surprised to see Andre still present. "How was it?" he asked quietly. Andre stood and stretched, then looked at Orion with something like reverence. "He stayed up all night," Andre said. "Didn't miss a single breath." He turned to Jonas. "Whatever happens next, he's earned the right to stay." Jonas gave a small nod, his throat tight. And in that quiet moment between disbelief and belief, doubt and faith, the hospital room finally lived up to its name. Mercy, grace, and for one night, peace. The machines were silent, but the room had begun to listen to something else entirely. It started the morning after Andre Moreau's overnight stay. Dr. Elia Navarro stood by the nurse's station holding a tablet that showed nothing out of the ordinary until she turned and saw Orion. The dog sat motionless by Luca's bed again, eyes fixed, breath slow and rhythmic. Not anxious, not restless, just vigilant. "What if we've been watching the wrong monitor?" she murmured aloud. Nurse Kemi Dorsey, sipping lukewarm coffee, glanced over. "What do you mean?" Navarro didn't answer immediately. She tapped her pen against the tablet, then turned toward Kemi. "I want a full EEG setup. she said. "Overnight monitoring. High resolution." Kemi raised a brow. "That's not standard protocol for static coma patients." "I know," Navarro paused, "but I want to overlay it with behavioral recordings. I want to track Luca's brain activity and compare it to Orion's behavior." Kemi blinked. "You want to sync a medical scan with a dog?" "Not just a dog," Navarro said. "A responder, a system all his own." She didn't wait for debate. That afternoon the room transformed. Leads were attached gently to Luca's scalp, thin wires trailing like silver threads toward the EEG monitor. Every blip, spike, and lull would now be recorded in real time. The nurses dimmed the lights, adjusted the camera angles. Jonas helped set up a second camera one, trained not on the machines, but on Orion. He positioned it carefully, focused on the German shepherd's eyes, posture, and tail. "If we're going to do this," he said, "we do it right." Kemi nodded, already entering timestamps into a shared chart. Dr. Navarro stood by the door, arms crossed. Her expression was calm, but beneath it burned a quiet urgency. "Tonight," she said, "we watch both patients." Night fell. Storm clouds drifted in again, brushing the windows with rain like ghostly fingers. Inside room 211, the rhythm of machines hummed low and steady. Mira sat curled in the corner chair, not asleep, but not fully awake either. 2:56 a.m. Orion stirred. His ears flicked. His eyes narrowed. He didn't bark. He simply stood and stepped closer to Luca's bed. 2:58 a.m. He sat. 2:59 a.m. He leaned forward, nose hovering just above the boy's outstretched hand. His muscles tensed. 3 o'clock a.m. On the dot, he let out a single, low whine, barely audible, barely anything, but it was enough. The EEG monitor blinked a spike, sharp and distinct, right temporal lobe. Kemi, reviewing from the monitoring room next door, straightened in her seat. "Navarro," she whispered into the mic, "you seeing this?" "I'm here," Navarro replied. Her voice carried the weight of confirmation. Another spike, then silence again. They reviewed the footage 5 times the next morning. Jonas leaned forward, pausing the video at 3:02. "Look at his posture," he said. "That's a trained alert stance, tail stiff, eyes fixed, breathing shallow. That's not random." Navarro folded her arms. "He knew. Before the spike." "No," Mira corrected gently. "He didn't know. He felt." It was the kind of statement science usually dismissed, but today no one challenged her. Over the next 4 nights, the experiment continued. Each time, Orion stirred at precisely 3 o'clock a.m. Each time, a spike followed within seconds. Once, Luca's index finger twitched just as Orion stood. Another night, a tear ran down the boy's cheek without provocation. The machines said coma, but the dog said otherwise. Navarro began documenting everything. Day 3. Log. Correlation continues. Orion reacts with 4 to 7 second anticipatory behavior preceding EEG events. Need further data, but pattern holds. She titled the file, Unorthodox Predictive Indicators, the Case of Orion. Word began to spread. Other doctors, once skeptical now, peeked into room 211 during late shifts, pretending to check vitals but really watching the dog. A young resident whispered, "I think he's doing what no machine can." An older nurse responded, "Or maybe he's just reminding us to stop relying only on machines." On the 5th night, Something changed. Orion didn't wait until 3 o'clock. At 2:57, he growled softly, stood, moved to the other side of the bed opposite his usual post. He barked once, not loud, not panicked, just firm. The spike came at 2:59, but this time it wasn't minor. The EEG pattern looked different, sharper, deeper. Kemi's fingers flew over the keyboard. "Navarro, this is seizure activity. Subclinical. Not visible externally, but it's there." Navarro's breath caught. He predicted a shift in the pattern. Jonas stared at the footage. He's mapping the storm from the inside. No one knew what to say after that. The next morning, Dr. Navarro called a meeting. In the conference room, she played the footage on loop. She didn't open with data. She didn't cite publications. She pointed to Orion. "While we monitored a silent coma," she said, "he monitored a silent signal." She looked around the room, at administrators, at doctors, at skeptics. "I'm not asking for belief," she said. "I'm asking for attention." And for the first time in weeks, they gave it. There was a reverent stillness to the hospital at that hour. 2:59 a.m. Outside, the wind whispered against the glass. In room 211, every light had been dimmed, but no one was asleep. Not tonight. Dr. Navarro stood just behind the glass divider. Nurse Kemi Dorsey sat at the control console, fingers hovering over the EEG feed. Jonas leaned on the edge of the doorway, arms crossed. Mira, unmoving, sat beside her son's bed, eyes not on Luca, but on the dog. And Orion, silent and statue still, sat at attention. Ears forward, chest barely rising. They were all waiting for something they couldn't explain, but somehow trusted more than their training. 3 Orion's head snapped toward Luca's right hand. 1 beat, 2. His body shifted forward. He released a sound that wasn't quite a bark, more like a sudden sharp huff of breath, his way of saying now. The EEG spiked. Kemi's eyes widened. Got it. Temporal lobe small amplitude, but definite activity. Mira didn't even look at the monitor. She was watching something else. Luca's hand. His index finger twitched. Once. It was subtle. Blink and you'd miss it. But they didn't blink, not this time. Navarro stepped inside, whispering, "Did you all see that?" Jonas nodded, not speaking. Mira's lips parted in shock. Orion remained motionless, except for his tail, which thumped once against the floor-like punctuation. I need to confirm this," Kemi stammered, turning to play back the live EEG feed and syncing it with the infrared footage of Orion. "Time stamp it," Navarro said, stepping closer to Luca. She leaned in gently, speaking as if he could hear. "You're still there, aren't you?" Luca's chest rose and fell slowly beneath the sheets, no other movement, but something had broken the stillness. Mira reached out with trembling fingers and touched the back of her son's hand. "Luca," she whispered, "I saw that. I saw you." Orion let out a soft whine, then settled back into a sphinx-like pose at the bedside, eyes watching every breath, every flutter of muscle, like a sentry to a world just beneath the surface. The replay confirmed it all. Orion moved at 3:00 countdown. EEG spike at 3:03, finger twitch at 3:05. Jonas leaned in as Kemi showed the overlay. "It's not coincidence, not at this point." Navarro turned to him, voice quiet. "He's ahead of the wave." "You mean predicting?" I mean feeling it, before it even fully registers. Kemi whispered, like pre-seizure aura, but translated through muscle, breath, instinct. Navarro straightened. I'm submitting this to the ethics board. We need to name what we're seeing. Later that morning, Mira stood on the hospital balcony, coffee untouched in her hand. Jonas joined her, quiet. She spoke first. It's not the twitch that got me. He raised an eyebrow. No. She shook her head. It's the way Orion didn't even look surprised, like he was expecting it, like he's known all along. Jonas exhaled. He's always been like that. In Mexico, during the quake. He kept leading us to voids under rubble we thought were hopeless. He doesn't need evidence. He is the evidence. Mira looked back through the window toward room 211. Then maybe it's time we start believing the evidence with 4 legs and a heartbeat. Jonas nodded, his voice rough. Amen to that. That night, a sign was taped to the door of room 211. Authorized research in progress. Quiet observation only. And beside it a new placard. Patient monitored by EEG plus Orion. Therapy K9. For the first time, the dog had a title on the wall, not just a presence, a part of the team. It was just after dawn when Dr. Elia Navarro sat alone in the observation lab, bathed in the sterile blue glow of EEG monitors and time-stamped data logs. The silence was thick, the kind of quiet that makes you hold your breath without realizing it. 5 nights, 5 barks, 5 spikes. It wasn't a coincidence anymore. It was a pattern, a language. She clicked through synchronized recordings once more, each file marked with a yellow tag. Orion alert, EEG spike, muscle response. It always started with him. The first night, he had stood abruptly and barked once, just a sharp single cry into the dark. The staff had jumped. The monitors had spiked. A tremor had rippled across Luca's right hand. The second night, Orion had let out a guttural growl before the same thing happened, only faster. By the third night, the pattern had settled into a rhythm, a warning bark 3 to 5 seconds later, a neural disturbance, enough to log, enough to measure, enough to be undeniable. Navarro leaned back in her chair, eyes bloodshot from staring at graphs, but mind burning bright. She wasn't just watching data anymore. She was witnessing something medical school had never prepared her for. Instinct beating science to the finish line. The door creaked softly. Jonas Gray stepped in, cradling a paper cup of hospital coffee and the ghost of a sleepless night in his eyes. Orion padded in behind him, tongue out, ears perked but alert. Navarro didn't look up. I didn't call this meeting, she said, voice calm. You didn't have to, Jonas replied, setting the coffee down beside her elbow. Navarro reached for it absently, still focused on the screen. He's consistent. To the second. Jonas pulled out a chair. That's not new for him. She turned. He barked 5 seconds before the spike last night. 7 the night before. 6.3 before that. Which is fast, Jonas said, but not too fast to be instinct. That's what makes it terrifying. He's not guessing. He's responding. Navarro swiveled toward the other monitor, then to her notebook. Its cover was black, unmarked. But the top page bore her title, scrawled in neat block letters, Unorthodox Predictive Indicators, the Case of Orion. She had underlined it twice. Jonas leaned over. You're writing it up? I'm documenting every piece. I want this peer-reviewed one day. I want it understood. He glanced at her, surprised. You don't sound skeptical anymore. Navarro offered a rare, tired smile. Skepticism is valuable, but so is humility. And frankly, that dog has more consistency than half our telemetry. Down the hall in room 211, Mira sat beside Luca's bed. She hadn't moved since the night before. Her fingers gently combed through her son's dark hair, lips whispering silent prayers, or maybe memories. Orion, after a long stretch and a yawn, settled at her feet. His head rested on his paws, but his eyes stayed fixed on Luca's chest. She reached down and rubbed behind his ears. "You knew before we did," she said quietly. "Didn't you?" Orion didn't move, but his tail tapped once, soft as a heartbeat. Back in the lab, Navarro turned her journal page and wrote, "5 consecutive nights of anticipatory alerts from therapy K9 Orion, matched by EEG recorded neurological activity within 5-7 seconds post-bark. This cannot be ignored." She paused. Her pen hovered. Then she added, "More than therapy, more than a companion. Orion may be the first documented case of instinct-based pre-ictal alerting in a pediatric coma patient. Further investigation warranted." Jonas read over her shoulder. "You're calling it predictive?" "I'm calling it unorthodox," she corrected. "But yes, if this holds for 2 more days, I'll push for formal recognition." "And Lyle?" Navarro's eyes hardened just slightly. "He'll catch up, or he'll be left behind." Later that afternoon, Orion barked again. Only once. Kemi and Jonas were both in the room. The EEG lit up. And this time, Luca's entire hand moved. A slight curl of fingers, a flex of muscle. Navarro entered the room seconds later and didn't say a word. She simply nodded. Mira stood, trembling. "Is it him?" Navarro replied gently, "Yes, and we're not the only ones who think so anymore." That night, a new protocol was entered into the hospital's internal research logs. Subject, Orion, K9. Alert behavior correlated with pediatric EEG activity. Status, ongoing. Lead, Dr. Ilia Navarro. Supporting, Nurse Dorsey, Jonas Gray, Mira Moreau, and at the bottom of the form, in small italicized font, "Instinct is not the opposite of science. It is where science begins." The conference room on the 3rd floor of Mercy Grace wasn't used often. It smelled faintly of printer toner and lemon-scented disinfectant, with walls lined by whiteboards no one had written on in years. But today, every seat was filled. The long table, polished to a sterile gleam, reflected the tension hanging over it like static. At the head of the table sat Grant Calloway, hospital administrator, in a precisely pressed suit and a watch that glinted more than his expression ever did. His fingers tapped the edge of a printed liability report with rhythmic precision, like a metronome in a ticking time bomb. "This is no longer a courtesy conversation," he began, voice as crisp as cold steel. "The therapy dog Orion is now a documented liability. He has broken hospital protocol on multiple occasions, bitten medical equipment, interrupted care procedures, spent unauthorized nights in the room of a vulnerable patient." He paused, letting the accusations hang like a noose. Across the table, Dr. Rowan Lyle nodded stiffly, arms crossed. "It's no longer anecdotal, it's administrative." Jonas Gray, seated one chair away from the door, clenched his jaw, but said nothing. Dr. Ilia Navarro, however, didn't flinch. She looked directly at Grant. "What you call a liability, I call data. 5 nights of consistent alerts preceding neurological events. One of them prevented a respiratory failure." Calloway didn't blink. I reviewed that footage. Impressive, but again unauthorized. You are not an animal behaviorist, Dr. Navarro. You are a neurologist. Let's keep the roles clear. Dr. Lyle shifted forward, tone icy. We are a medical institution, not a zoo. Navarro exhaled slowly, containing the retort already building behind her teeth. Instead, she opened her leather-bound research log and placed a printed EEG chart in front of the board. 5 lines, 5 timestamps, 1 correlation. Orion is not acting out. He is responding, she said. I am requesting a formal exception under emergency observational research. We don't need to publish it yet, but we do need to continue recording. And if the dog is wrong? Calloway asked flatly. What happens if he bites a patient, or misses a cue, or causes panic? Jonas finally spoke. He already hasn't missed, that's the point. He's also not a medical device, Calloway snapped. He has no license, no FDA approval. He can't be calibrated. Can't be held accountable. Neither can a mother's instinct, Navarro replied, voice low. But we trust it in a crisis. Silence followed. For the first time in the room, a fracture appeared, not just between science and instinct, but between protocol and principle. A nurse administrator, seated at the end, raised her hand. What are we voting on exactly? Calloway adjusted his tie. Removal of the dog. Immediate. Full revocation of therapy, clearance, and behavioral evaluation within 30 days. He may reapply under new conditions after that period, assuming the patient is no longer in critical condition. Navarro stood. No, she said. The motion should be this. Allow the dog to remain under full observation, with 24/7 supervision and legal liability waivers signed by the family. While he remains, we collect data. We do not act based on fear, we act based on evidence. Jonas glanced across the table. Mira Moreau had entered quietly and now stood by the door, holding a signed waiver in her trembling hand. My son is alive, she said, and if you're going to take away the one soul who seems to know why, then you'd better give me something better than liability. Calloway frowned. This isn't personal, Mrs. Moreau. It's not yours to say what's personal, she replied, her voice like cracked porcelain. You didn't watch that dog bark seconds before my boy's breath caught. You didn't see him push the call button with his nose because no one was listening. But he was. The room held its breath. Lyle cleared his throat. This isn't a debate. This is a vote. The board chair, a gray-haired woman named Sheila Edmonds, finally spoke. 2 motions on the table, one for immediate removal, one for supervised observation under waiver. We vote now. Navarro sat again. Jonas kept his eyes on Mira. Calloway's fingers twitched. One by one, the hands raised. 4 for removal, 5 against. Motion denied. Orion stays. Outside the room, in the hallway, Jonas exhaled for the first time in what felt like an hour. Navarro leaned against the wall beside him, weary but solid. 48 hours, she said. Jonas nodded. 48 to prove we're not insane. Navarro looked toward room 211. No, she said. 48 to prove he isn't a miracle. A new sign was taped outside room 211. Notice, restricted access, observational research in progress, authorized staff only. Below it, in smaller print, all entries monitored and recorded per hospital board decision, case number 20 issue 6B, animal presence under conditional waiver. It looked official, cold, clinical. Inside the room, though, everything felt warmer somehow. Orion lay at the foot of Luca's bed, not sleeping, not alert, just there. His breathing matched the quiet rhythm of the machines. One paw rested gently over the boy's blanket, and when the heart monitor made the soft chirp of a stable pulse, The dog's ears gave the faintest flick, as if he was still listening for something deeper than sound. Mira Moreau sat in the corner chair, clutching a clipboard with trembling hands. Her signature was still drying in black ink at the bottom of a thick legal document titled Waiver of Liability and Assumption of Risk Regarding Therapeutic Animal Research Deployment. She hadn't read every word. She didn't have to. She had already made her decision the moment they used the word remove. Dr. Navarro entered quietly, carrying a small portable EEG unit now linked to both the bedside monitor and an external tablet. Her expression was tired but not defeated. "We're officially on the clock," she said. "Monitoring begins now. All behavior logged, all anomalies matched with EEG outputs. Video recordings archived every 12 hours. Jonas followed behind, carrying a wireless camera rig he'd borrowed from the hospital's media wing, something usually used for promo videos or charity live streams. Tonight, it would document a dog doing what machines hadn't yet been able to explain. He crouched beside Orion. "This is your shot, buddy," he whispered, rubbing between the dog's ears. "You've got 48 hours to convince a building full of skeptics that instinct matters more than protocol." Orion didn't move, just blinked slowly, then turned his head toward Luca with a soft sigh that sounded almost human. Dr. Lyle didn't come. Neither did Administrator Calloway, but their fingerprints were everywhere. Surveillance cameras now watched every angle of the room. The intercom had been tested 3 times to ensure immediate call access. A security officer stood at the far end of the hall, arms folded, watching with the blank expression of someone trained not to care. Navarro sat beside Mira and handed her a small laminated chart-colored codes representing Orion's possible behaviors and how they'd be logged. Red, aggression or unprompted escalation. Yellow, moderate stress behavior, whining, pacing. Green, passive presence or trained alert posture. Blue, rest state. Mira looked at it briefly, then set it down on the side table. "He's not going to give them red." "No," Navarro said, "but they're watching, hoping for it." A soft cough came from the hallway. Jonas leaned into the doorway, then gave Mira a nod. "Cameras rolling?" Mira stood, slowly crossed the room, and lowered herself onto the mattress beside her son. Orion shifted only slightly, as if accommodating her weight instinctively. She took Luca's limp hand into hers and brought it to her lips. "We're all in now," she whispered. The machines hummed. Outside, the security guard yawned, and somewhere deep in the layered space between coma and consciousness, a boy's brain flickered, and a dog kept watch. Later that evening, the hospital hallway had quieted into its usual 2 a.m. rhythm, a few fluorescent lights humming overhead, a janitor's cart wheeling past, distant footsteps muffled against linoleum. But inside room 211, nothing was typical anymore. Mira sat in silence, scrolling through old videos on her phone. Luca, at age 4, chasing bubbles in the backyard. Luca, at age 6, learning to ride a bike and falling, then laughing through the tears. And then, one she hadn't watched in a long time. A fire drill at Luca's elementary school. The kids lined up outside. A handler kneeling beside a big tan German shepherd wearing a search and rescue vest. Luca's voice unmistakable. "That's rescue dog number 1. He came to save people in the earthquake. He knows if someone's stuck, even if you can't see him." The camera panned slightly. Luca knelt beside the dog, arms wrapped around his neck, smiling. The timestamp. March 14th, 8 months ago. Mira turned the phone toward Orion, now curled beneath the bed, one eye open. "You remember him, don't you?" she murmured. "You knew before I did." Orion shifted forward, his nose touching the edge of the bed frame near where Luca's feet rested. His tail didn't wag. He didn't make a sound. He simply stayed. Navarro typed notes at the observation console beside her. On screen, the EEG line flickered slightly, a brief, imperceptible ripple that hadn't happened in days. She leaned forward. "Jonas?" He stepped closer. "You see it too?" "Barely. But it's there." At that moment, Orion lifted his head eyes, locking on the screen, as if he too recognized the shift. Navarro looked at Mira. "We may have just crossed into the first anomaly." Mira held her son's hand tighter. "Then, let's keep walking." The corridor outside the neurology wing always smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant and fatigue. Dr. Elia Navarro stood alone near the glass observation panel that overlooked room 211, one hand resting against the cold frame. From here, she could just make out Orion's still form curled beneath Luca's bed, and Mira sitting upright, alert, her fingers tracing idle patterns on her son's blanket. She didn't hear the footsteps approach until a voice cut the silence like a scalpel. "You're staking your entire name on a dog." Navarro didn't turn. "Hello, Rowan." Dr. Rowan Lyle crossed his arms, the tailored sleeves of his white coat stiff with starch. He looked exhausted, but his tone stayed sharp, measured, clinical, the way you sharpen a blade, not wield it. "I saw the board summary," he said. "Your notes, your petition. You signed off on an unregulated observational study, using an unlicensed animal, with no peer-reviewed basis." He paused, then added, lower, "If this dog turns out wrong, it's on your license." Navarro finally turned to face him. Her eyes didn't flicker. "And if he's right?" she asked. Rowan's jaw tensed. Navarro didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "If he's right, it's on our conscience. Yours and mine." He looked away briefly. She took a step forward, not aggressive, just enough to shrink the space between clinical distance and human consequence. "You've made your career on being the most precise person in the room, the most correct. I respect that," she said. "But being correct has never been the same as being right." Rowan scoffed, but softly. "We are doctors. We trust the data." "And yet the data followed the dog," Navarro said. That stopped him. She continued, slower now. "You saw what I saw. You know what the EEG showed. 5 nights, 5 spikes, all preceded by behavior we dismissed as noise." He looked back toward the window, toward the barely visible tail flick under the bed. "You think this is a breakthrough?" he said. "I think it's a fluke." "I'm not asking you to believe in magic," Navarro said. "I'm asking you to consider that something you don't understand doesn't automatically make it wrong." Rowan exhaled hard. "You're sentimentalizing. That's what this is. A mother desperate to find meaning. A handler clinging to relevance, and you—" He caught himself, almost softened the edge, but not quite. "You should know better." Navarro stepped back, her voice suddenly quieter, lower than his, but steadier. "I do know better," she said. "That's why I'm listening. To the one creature in this building who hasn't asked for attention, who hasn't needed to prove anything, who simply stayed." Rowan's brow creased, but the rest of his face stayed impassive. He didn't sign waivers. He didn't give speeches. He barked. He waited. He curled himself around the boy and refused to move. She gestured faintly toward the window. "And maybe that's the purest diagnostic we've got." Rowan looked down at the floor, then at her again. "I want to be wrong," he said finally. "I do." "No," Navarro replied. "You want to be safe." The silence between them was long and dry. Finally, she added, "But medicine was never supposed to be safe. It was supposed to be brave." Rowan turned, the argument unresolved but no longer burning. As he walked away, Navarro watched his back disappear down the hallway. Then she turned once more to the glass, where Mira now leaned down to whisper something into her son's ear, soft, intimate, a prayer or a promise. And beneath the bed, Orion didn't move, but his ears were listening. The hospital at 3 o'clock a.m. was a world unto itself, half-lit, suspended in silence, and haunted by the soft hum of machines breathing for those who couldn't. Outside, the desert wind scraped against the windows like a voice trying to be heard. Inside room 211, Orion stirred. His head lifted from the floor where he'd been sleeping, his body still but eyes wide, tracking something no human could see. Mira Moreau lay curled in a chair beside her son's bed, her hand wrapped around Luca's fingers like a life-preserver. Jonas, slouched near the door, blinked awake at the low growl rising from the dog's throat. Orion stood. A heartbeat passed. Then, with startling clarity, 2 sharp barks shattered the stillness. 3:01 a.m. On the monitor above the bed, the EEG spiked like a lightning bolt tearing across a flat-line sky. A second later, Luca's eyelids fluttered. Not much. Barely a tremor, but it was enough. Jonas bolted upright. "Navarro!" he shouted. Footsteps thundered down the hall before the word finished leaving his mouth. The night shift team rushed in, led by Dr. Elia Navarro, her lab coat half-buttoned, eyes fierce and alert. Kemi Dorsey, the night nurse, didn't wait for instructions. She was already reading vitals. "EEG spike," Jonas said breathlessly. "Exactly after the barks. And his eyes." Navarro's gaze snapped to the boy. "Luca," she called gently, kneeling beside him. "Can you hear me?" No answer, but his hand twitched 3 times, deliberate, unmistakable. Mira gasped. Then, slowly, she stood unable to speak as her hand flew to her mouth. Luca's fingers moved again, this time curling faintly as if grasping something invisible. Mira broke. She collapsed onto the bed, sobbing into the crook of her son's arm, her shoulders shaking with a year's worth of pain flooding free in seconds. Her whisper cracked open the room. "He's in there. He's fighting." Jonas turned to Navarro. "Tell me that's coincidence." Navarro didn't answer. Her eyes were already locked on the EEG, on Orion, and back again. The German shepherd had not moved since the second bark. He now sat rigidly by the bedside, tail motionless, body taut, staring straight at Luca with the devotion of a soldier awaiting command. "He knew," Navarro murmured. "He knew." The other doctors stood in stunned silence. A resident muttered, "How the hell did he predict it?" Navarro didn't even blink. Maybe it wasn't prediction. Maybe it was connection. Outside, a soft rumble of thunder rolled far across the desert horizon. Inside, the only sound was Mira's quiet weeping and the low whine Orion gave in return. Just one, as if to say, "I'm still here." And so was Luca. Somewhere, just beneath the silence, he had barked back. The next morning arrived shrouded in silence, one not born of peace, but of awe. The events of 3:01 a.m. still hung in the air like morning mist. Luca's fingers had twitched, his eyes had fluttered, and Orion had known before any machine Jonas Gray hadn't slept. He stood now in the hospital's rooftop courtyard, mug of coffee growing cold in his hand, eyes unfocused on the mountains glowing faintly in dawn's light. But his mind wasn't in Nevada. It was 3 years and 1,800 miles away. Mexico City, post-quake chaos, the smell of gas and dust, concrete split like torn pages. He'd been part of the U.S. disaster response team deployed after the tremor. Buildings had fallen like dominoes, entire blocks reduced to rubble. And among the wreckage, Orion had earned his name. They were working a collapsed school 3 floors turned into a 2-foot crust. The heat was brutal. Drones and thermal sensors had done their sweep. Nothing. Clear, the tech had said. But Orion hadn't moved. He just stood frozen over a patch of debris the size of a welcome mat. Refused to budge. Snarled when another handler tried to redirect him. "We've already checked there," someone said. "Nothing." Jonas had trusted him anyway. They dug. 4 feet down, between crushed lockers and a desk folded like origami, was a hollow pocket of air, and in it, a boy no older than Luca. Bruised, dehydrated, but alive. Curled fetal, clutching a necklace. No one had heard him. No sensor had detected him. Only Orion. Jonas ran a hand over his jaw now, the memory blooming with fresh weight. He knows. He always knows. Behind him, footsteps approached. It was Dr. Navarro. "Can I interrupt your war story?" she asked softly, eyes tired but awake in a new way. He nodded. "I've seen this before," he said, voice hoarse. "Not seizures, not comas. Him. The way he anchors. Like something in him locks onto life that's barely there." Navarro looked out over the railing. "Machines read data. Dogs read presence." Jonas finally turned to her. "Back in that school it was quiet. We couldn't hear anyone. We had all the equipment. All the readings said no one's left. But Orion wouldn't let go. Not until we found the boy." She was quiet for a beat. "And here? He's doing the same thing. Standing watch over someone everyone else said was gone." They shared a silence, charged with something deeper than science or training, something old, primal. The instinct that lived before medicine had names for things. Navarro spoke first. "We'll schedule another neuroconsult today. I want a deeper scan, maybe even a repeat MRI with higher resolution. If there's something structural we've missed." "Then Orion's been warning us for days," Jonas finished. Navarro offered a rare smile. "If this pans out, he won't just be a therapy animal anymore. He'll be the first non-human patient advocate in this hospital." Jonas gave a low chuckle. "Think Lyle'll let you print him an ID badge?" "I'll laminate it myself." They both turned as a nurse stepped onto the rooftop. "Dr. Navarro?" He twitched again, right hand, and Orion was already sitting up. Navarro nodded. "Tell the team I'll be down in 5. As the nurse disappeared, Jonas looked toward the east, where sunlight was just breaching the ridge. "Sometimes," he murmured, "you don't need a searchlight. You just need a dog that refuses to leave the dark." The conference room was too quiet. No hum of machines, no bark to cut through tension, just fluorescent lights and the low buzz of institutional distrust. Dr. Rowan Lyle stood at the far end of the table, arms crossed, his white coat immaculate, as if creases were his armor. "Correlation," he said slowly, "is not causation. A dog barking at 3 a.m. is not clinical evidence of neurological distress." Across from him, Dr. Ilya Navarro's jaw tightened. "And yet the EEG says otherwise. Minor spikes, isolated twitches. You're building a castle on grains of sand." Mira sat quietly until now, wringing the hem of her sweater like a life raft, her knuckles pale. Navarro pressed on. There may be something deeper. The patterns are too consistent to ignore. I want a high-resolution MRI. I want to look at Luca's brainstem, the posterior fossa, areas that might have been masked on the last scan. Lyle's expression hardened. You want to sedate a critical pediatric coma patient based on the behavioral tics of a German shepherd? Navarro didn't blink. I want to act before another tube comes loose, before another coincidence almost kills him. You're acting on instinct, he snapped. And maybe, Navarro said, voice cooling to steel, that's what medicine needs once in a while. Jonas, standing quietly near the door, shifted his stance but stayed silent. This was not his arena, not yet. Then Mira stood. Her voice cracked on the first word. He barked. When no one else heard anything. He barked when the EEG hadn't even registered yet. And last night, he barked twice. My son's eyes moved. His eyes moved. Lyle turned toward her. Mrs. Moreau. No. She stepped forward. Her voice no longer cracked. It sharpened. You weren't there when I held his hand and it twitched, when that dog didn't sleep, when it scratched the floor until its paws bled, trying to tell us something. He's not a tool. He's not a coincidence. He's trying to speak, and the only ones listening are the ones who don't have the luxury to doubt. Lyle opened his mouth, but she cut him off. What else does he have to do? She said, each word breaking like a wave. What else does he have to do before you believe him? Silence followed. Lyle looked away, not in shame, but in calculation. Navarro softened. We're running the MRI tonight, no sedation, low movement scan. If there's nothing, I'll close the case. Lyle gave a shallow nod. I'll note my objections in the file. As he turned to leave, Jonas stepped forward, not loud, not brash, just firm. I've worked with Orion in disaster zones, in rubble, in flame. He doesn't bark unless there's a reason. Lyle didn't answer. He didn't need to. He was already losing the room. Outside the window, the storm clouds gathered again, but this time, no one looked up. They were finally listening. The machine hummed like a mechanical heartbeat, steady and detached. Luca's small frame lay cradled in the MRI bore, surrounded by walls of white plastic and magnetized precision. Mira stood behind the observation glass, arms wrapped tightly around herself. The room was freezing, but the cold came from inside her. Jonas sat beside her, hand resting gently on Orion's collar. The dog hadn't moved in 10 minutes. Not a twitch, not a shift. His eyes locked forward, as if staring through walls. Into the machine. Into the boy. Dr. Navarro hovered near the control panel, flanked by 2 technicians. Her eyes scanned the first set of incoming images layer by layer. Brain, cortex, midline, cerebellum. Then, she leaned closer. Stop. Back 2 frames. There. Everyone froze. A technician adjusted the overlay. The faint outline of a blush-colored mass, nestled close to the base of the brainstem, came into view. A shadow. A bloom of darkness in the most delicate of places. Navarro's breath hitched. It's a hematoma, she said softly. Posterior, submillimeter, hidden behind vascular noise. No wonder we missed it in the standard scans. Mira's nails dug into her palms. What does that mean? Navarro didn't look away from the screen. It means pressure. Pressure in a place where even a millimeter can change everything. Breathing, movement, consciousness. Can it be removed? Jonas asked. It's operable, Navarro nodded, but risky. That part of the brain controls involuntary functions, breathing rhythm, heartbeat modulation. One slip. The words didn't need finishing, but the silence after them did. "So," Mira whispered, voice shaking, "he wasn't just sleeping all this time?" "No." Navarro swallowed. "He's been trapped, like being buried alive inside his own body." Jonas looked at Orion. The dog still hadn't moved, but his ears slowly rotated forward. "And Orion knew," Mira said. Navarro finally turned to her. He felt it, in the way only he could, before we ever saw it, before the machines even registered. One of the techs leaned forward, enhancing the scan. The hematoma pulsed faintly, like a distant thundercloud behind a curtain of fog. Navarro exhaled. "It's a ticking time bomb." A long pause fell over the room. Then Orion stood, not barked, not growled. He just stood, like a soldier waiting for the order. Mira stepped toward the glass, placing her hand flat against it, eyes locked on her son through layers of plastic, steel, and fear. "We missed it," she whispered. "But he didn't." Navarro moved toward the intercom. "Page Singh, we're prepping for a consult. Neurovascular, tonight." Jonas turned toward her. "We going in?" Navarro nodded. "There's no other choice. Time's running out." The screen showed Luca's brain once more, and in its shadows, finally, was an answer. The conference room on the third floor had always felt sterile, but tonight it pulsed with dread. A projection of Luca's MRI hovered on the wall, its hazy, beautiful brutality laid bare in colored cross-sections. The hematoma sat like a coiled serpent at the base of his brainstem, silent and waiting. Dr. Adrian Singh stood at the head of the table, arms folded, surgical scrub still dusted with remnants of another life-or-death operation. His voice, when it came, was clinical but not cold. "If we operate, there's a chance of hemorrhage. He could lose speech, motor function. Worse." "And if we don't?" Andre Moreau asked, his hands clenched on the edge of the table as if trying to keep himself from falling off the world. "Pressure continues," Dr. Navarro said gently. "Seizure activity will increase. Coma deepens. Eventually, even the basic autonomic system's breathing, heartbeat, could be compromised." In the corner, Mira didn't speak, her arms wrapped around her own body like armor, eyes locked on the screen. She didn't blink. She didn't cry, because this was the moment where no option meant safety. Jonas sat beside her, fingers resting on Orion's back. The dog hadn't growled, hadn't barked, but his breathing was shallow, like a coiled spring. Dr. Lyle broke the silence. "And what does the data say, realistically?" Navarro didn't look away from the image. "The data doesn't know him. The dog does." Andre stood, pacing. "So we're supposed to gamble our son's life, based on a German shepherd's behavior?" The air cracked. Orion's ears shot forward, muscles tensing. Jonas leaned in, calm but firm. "With respect, sir, he's not just a dog. He's a responder, a trained search unit, and for the last 2 weeks he's been trying to tell us something no machine could." Andre looked down. He didn't answer. Mira finally rose to her feet. She walked slowly to the wall projection, reached out, let her fingers hover just an inch from the image of her son's brain. "When he was 5, she said softly, Luca had a nightmare about being stuck in a cave. Couldn't scream, couldn't move, just darkness and stone pressing in." No one interrupted. She turned to Dr. Singh. That's where he is now, isn't it? Singh hesitated, then nodded. Mira looked to Jonas, then to Orion. I don't care if it was instinct, or training, or God whispering in his ear. That dog told us the cave exists. Jonas spoke, his voice nearly breaking. He's been saying, time's almost up. A deep silence settled over the room. Finally, Dr. Singh took a breath. We'll assemble the team. Prep the OR. We go in tonight. Andre stepped back, stunned. That's it? No, Singh replied. That's everything. And as they left to ready the operating theater, Orion stood and followed, not a sound from his throat. But his pace was steady. He didn't need to speak. They were finally listening. The first thunderclap hit at 9:07 p.m., rattling the high glass panes of the pediatric wing like fists on a locked door. The rain came sideways, slanting sheets that obscured the outside world in white noise and shadows. Inside room 213, the storm had already begun. Orion was pacing in tight circles beside Luca's bed, his nails clicking across the tile, his breath short and ragged. His tail, usually low and still, swished anxiously from side to side like a metronome ticking off time no one could stop. Mira sat at the foot of the bed, fingers digging into the blanket like she was holding on for dear life. He's never acted like this before, she whispered to Jonas, who stood just inside the doorway. Orion let out a low whine, then another longer, higher, urgent. The IV monitor beeped once. Luca's heart rate climbed by a notch. Jonas took a step closer, watching the dog with trained eyes. He feels the shift. Something's changing, fast. Suddenly Orion lunged, not at anyone but toward the bed. His front paws clawed at the mattress, as if trying to climb up beside the boy. His teeth gently closed around the rail, then released. Then again. It wasn't aggression. It was insistence. The nurses rushed in, startled. "Get him down!" one shouted. "He's not allowed up." "He knows," Mira snapped. "Look at him. He knows." Dr. Navarro entered seconds later, surgical scrubs already under her coat. The look on her face said it all. She had seen the most recent data spike. Luca's EEG had just lit up like fireworks behind closed eyes. "Vitals are unstable," she said tightly. "If we wait, we risk brainstem failure." Orion let out a single, sharp bark, then stared at the door. The message was clear. Now. Outside, lightning tore a forked gash across the sky. The entire hallway flickered as backup generators kicked in with a low hum. "Let's move," Navarro said. "We prepped the OR. They're standing by." Mira bent over her son, brushing the damp curls from his forehead. "We're going in with you," she whispered. Jonas clipped Orion's lead onto his collar. The dog resisted, pulled toward Luca, but then relented, falling into step like a soldier summoned back to duty. As they wheeled Luca's bed out into the corridor, the power flickered again. Thunder rolled overhead like a slow drumbeat. Jonas glanced at the storm outside, then down at Orion. "You called this," he muttered. "Let's hope they're ready." And as the surgical team disappeared down the corridor, Mira gripping Luca's hand, Orion trotting behind the hallway fell silent again. But the storm had only just begun. The operating room was cold by design, but tonight it felt like a vault. Every breath fogged inside face shields. Every movement calculated, exact. No voices above a whisper. No sound beyond the metronome of machines, the steady drip of anesthesia, and the ticking clock mounted high on the sterile wall. At the center, Luca Moreau, tiny, still, Draped in sterile blue, his fragile frame dwarfed by the bright arc of surgical lights above. Dr. Adrian Singh hovered over the boy's skull like a sculptor facing marble. One tremor, one fraction too deep, and the damage would be irreversible. The hematoma was nestled between dense nerve clusters at the base of the brainstem territory that demanded reverence. "Pressure here," he murmured, fingers steady. "Scalpel." Dr. Lyle stood on the left, unusually quiet. It wasn't pride or ego tonight. It was awe. The boy's vitals were holding for now. But time was not their ally. Dr. Elia Navarro kept her eyes on the real-time neuroimaging. Breath held each time the scanner flickered with micro-adjustments. "Millimeters, Adrian," she said quietly. "Always," he replied. The suction hummed. The brain pulsed beneath the surgeon's hands, a galaxy of nerves and fluid and secrets. Singh whispered something inaudible, but it sounded like a prayer. Outside the OR, the garden sat cloaked in storm-soaked silence. The rain had passed, leaving everything glistening and raw. Mira stood beneath a thin awning. Orion's leash wound tightly around her hand. The dog sat pressed against her leg, head low, ears alert. Every few seconds, his body twitched, as if some echo of the surgery found its way to him, too. "They're in," Mira said, not to anyone, not expecting an answer. She reached down and touched his collar, her fingers trembling. "You stayed, when no one else did, when the machines said there was nothing left." Orion whined, just once, soft. "Don't leave him now," she whispered. "Don't let go." Thunder rumbled far in the distance, long past the worst of the storm, but still there, lingering, like doubt. Orion stood up suddenly, alert. His eyes focused not on the door, not on the garden, on something unseen. And Mira, holding her breath, did the same. Inside, Dr. Singh gave a quiet nod. The clot had shifted. Navarro exhaled sharply, her hand moving across the screen. "It's draining. We're stable. Repeat, stable." Dr. Lyle blinked. "He made it this far?" Singh didn't look up. "Now we see if he comes back." There's a silence. Hospitals know too well. It comes after the chaos. After the last stitch is tied, the last heartbeat stabilized, the gloves peeled off and binned. It's the kind of silence that doesn't hum, it hovers, between breath and prayer, between fact and faith. That silence now lived in room 213. The fluorescent lights had been dimmed. Machines whispered softly, low beeps, quiet pulses. A single monitor tracked Luca's vitals, its screen glowing pale green like a lighthouse in fog. Mira sat in the recliner beside the bed, her eyes dry only because they had nothing left to give. Her hands rested in her lap, clenched so tightly that her knuckles looked bruised. She hadn't moved in hours. Not since they'd wheeled him back, forehead stitched, monitors blinking, breathing tube intact. "He's out of danger," Dr. Navarro had said. But Mira knew better. Danger wasn't just about clots or bleeds or numbers. Danger was the place where a mother could look at her son and not know if he was still in there. Orion lay curled beneath the hospital bed like a shadow made solid. His ears twitched only when a nurse entered. The rest of the time he didn't stir. Not to eat, not to water, not even to look up. He simply stayed, curled tight, still as stone, His tail didn't wag. His chest rose slowly, rhythmically matching the rise and fall of Luca's. Mira bent forward, one hand reaching down into the darkness beneath the bed. Her fingers found his fur, warm and silent. "He hasn't left," she whispered. "He's still here." Orion didn't move. "That means Luca is too." A tear rolled down her cheek, landing silently on the floor. Outside, the sun was trying to return weak rays cutting through remnants of the storm, slanting across the room in gold and dust. The nurses brought in coffee, but it went untouched. Jonas came and went, saying nothing, just checking. Dr. Lyle lingered in the hallway, saying less. Dr. Navarro sat at her desk across the corridor, updating charts but glancing toward the window every 5 minutes, as if willing the machines to blink louder, more alive. Hours passed like molasses. Each tick of the clock became a test of endurance. Mira counted them not in seconds, but in heartbeats, in breaths, in barks that never came. And then, just before the hour turned 5 a.m., Orion's body shifted almost imperceptibly. His ear flicked, his nose lifted. He exhaled sharply and looked up at the bed. Mira froze. She leaned forward. "Orion?" But he wasn't looking at her. He was staring at the boy, staring through the frame, through the wires and gauze and IV lines, staring like he heard something Mira couldn't hear yet. The clock glowed 3:00 a.m. The room was hushed in that sacred way hospitals often become during deep night, when fluorescent lights dim just enough to let the dark speak, and machines lower their hums, as if not to wake something sleeping too close to the veil. Mira had drifted into a half-sleep, her head resting near Luca's hand, her fingers loosely curled around the rail of the bed. The fatigue wasn't just physical, it was bone deep, weeks in the making, carved into her with every test, every breath monitored, every unanswered prayer. Then it happened. Not loud, not dramatic, just one small flick. Orion's left ear twitched. His head rose slowly as if pulled by an invisible thread. His eyes locked onto Luca's face intent, still, unblinking. Mira didn't move at first. Her sleep-drenched brain registered the motion the way a mother might notice the slight rustle of a crib in the middle of the night. But something in her, something older than thought, snapped her awake. She followed Orion's gaze, Luca's face, still the same, but then his eyelids twitched, just once, a flutter, like a memory catching the wind. Mira sat upright, breath caught in her chest. "Luca?" The whisper left her without permission. Orion remained frozen, ears forward, body low, every inch of him attuned. Like he'd been waiting for this moment, coiled inside it. And then Luca's eyes opened. Not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly, like sunrise breaking through a thick fog. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. He didn't even blink at first. He just looked, straight ahead, straight at Orion, not at the lights, not the IVs, not even his mother, at the dog beneath his bed, as if the only bridge back to this world was him. Orion gave the faintest tail thump, silent, soft against the linoleum. It was all the confirmation Mira needed. Tears filled her eyes, but her body wouldn't move. She was afraid that if she did, it might break whatever fragile tether had just been reconnected. "Hey," she choked, her hand trembling as it brushed Luca's forehead. "Hey, baby. You're here. You came back." Luca's gaze drifted to her then, just barely. His mouth parted, dry. No sound. But his fingers shifted ever so slightly, reaching down. Orion pressed his head into the edge of the mattress. And for one eternal second, nothing else in the world existed but that boy and that dog, and the space between them finally closed. The sun hadn't risen yet. Its light waited behind the desert horizon, caught in that suspended breath between night and day. Inside room 217, everything was still dim. The monitors blinked in rhythm. The air was thick with saline and silence. Luca lay propped against a stack of pillows, his small chest rising slowly beneath the cotton blanket. His eyes, open for the last several hours, had tracked people, lights, the window, but he hadn't said a word. Not yet. Mira hadn't moved from his side. She had memorized every movement, every blink, every breath, every faint shift of his hand. She didn't ask him to speak. Not because she wasn't desperate to hear him, but because she knew the first words back from the edge don't come because someone asks. They come because something calls. Orion lay curled at the foot of the bed. His head rested across the metal rail, eyes never leaving the boy. Nurse Kemi stood silently near the door, tears she thought she'd cried out long ago suddenly warming her cheek again. Jonas leaned in the back corner, hands folded, jaw clenched, like he didn't trust it to open without breaking. And then it happened. So faint it might have been mistaken for a sigh. Luca's lips parted. A tiny breath escaped. His voice, when it came, was sandpaper and sunlight. Hoarse, raw, fragile, but clear. Orion. A single word. Not Mom, not Dad. Orion. And the world stopped. Mira's breath hitched. Her hand flew to her mouth as tears overtook her faster than sound. Andre, who had just stepped into the room with a coffee he never took a sip of, froze mid-step. The cup slipped from his hand and thudded softly onto the floor, forgotten. Orion lifted his head, ears alert. Tail thumped just once. He stepped forward, placing both paws on the mattress beside Luca. Their eyes met, and in that moment, it wasn't a boy waking up or a dog reacting. It was two souls recognizing a bond that had never broken. Luca reached out slowly, fingers trembling, and laid them against Orion's fur. "Good boy," he rasped. "You came back." That did it. Jonas turned his back to the wall, wiping at his eyes with the sleeve of his jacket. Kemi sniffed hard and stepped into the hallway, murmuring something about needing more charts. Mira let the sob escape, loud, unrestrained, not from sadness but from the tidal wave of relief that had waited for days to find a shore. And Orion? He simply laid down again, as if to say, mission complete. 6 weeks later, a new plaque appeared outside the pediatric wing at St. Gabriel Medical Center. It didn't bear the name of a doctor or a donor. It bore the name of a dog. Orion, first responder, silent witness, instinct healer. The Bio-Alert Therapy Animal Pilot Program had passed its second board vote. Unanimously this time. The paperwork was still warm, but the change was already rippling far beyond the hospital walls. Orion lay on his side in the therapy courtyard, paws crossed like he'd been doing this his whole life. Beside him sat Dr. Elia Navarro, clipboard in hand, glasses pushed up onto her forehead, trying to look official, but unable to hide the quiet smile she wore now like second skin. A dozen staff gathered on the patio, some in scrubs, some in lab coats. Most weren't there on the clock. They just wanted to witness it. Dr. Rowan Lyle stood in the back, arms folded. He didn't smile, but he didn't leave either. Navarro clicked the pen. Subject, Orion. Response window accuracy within 2 seconds of neural anomaly detection. Behavior consistency maintained across 17 post-surgical nights. She lowered the clipboard and looked down at the German shepherd beside her. Co-researcher. The word made Jonas, standing a few feet away, with his hands in his pockets, let out a breath of a laugh. Not mocking, just overwhelmed. I keep forgetting, he said softly to Mira, who stood beside him. He didn't need our permission to be brilliant. He just needed us to get out of the way. Mira watched Orion as he rose to greet a young girl in a wheelchair. The girl giggled as he gently pressed his nose against her knee. He never wanted to be the center of attention, Mira said. He just wanted someone to listen. Behind them, a banner fluttered gently in the desert wind. Bio-Alert Therapy Unit, Pioneering Canine-Assisted Diagnostic Awareness. Navarro stepped to the podium, nothing fancy, just a portable mic and a few wires. Her voice was calm, but it carried conviction. We train machines to notice patterns. We train algorithms to predict risk. But sometimes the oldest intelligence we ignore walks on 4 legs and listens with its whole being. She paused. We are not replacing medicine. We're remembering that healing is not always measurable by screens. Someone in the crowd clapped. Then others joined. It wasn't raucous. It was reverent. A nurse brought Orion a small silver tag, etched with his new title. Instinct Unit 01. He didn't bark. He didn't wag wildly. He just sat tall and still eyes scanning the crowd, tail gently brushing the tile. As if he knew, he wasn't just a therapy dog anymore. He was a new kind of doctor. The house looked smaller than Luca remembered. The paint still flaked near the shutters. The porch creaked when the screen door opened. Wind brushed through the wind chimes she and Andre had hung 2 years ago after one of Luca's school art fairs. But everything felt softer now. The van eased into the driveway. No sirens, no hospital hum, just tires crunching gravel and the slow click of the door handle as Mira stepped out and opened the back seat. "Ready, kiddo?" Luca nodded. Still a little pale, still leaning on his mother's arm, but standing, alive, awake, whole in a way she wasn't sure she'd ever see again. Orion jumped out after them. He didn't bolt, didn't bark. He just walked ahead a few paces and then turned as if to say, "Come on, I've already checked. It's safe now." On the porch, Mira paused. Her hand rested against the wood post. For a second she just watched. Watched the boy. Watched the dog. Watched the world hold its breath and finally exhale. Inside, sunlight filtered through curtains that had been drawn too long. A pair of Luca's sneakers still sat by the stairs, one of them half chewed from years ago when Orion had been just a visitor during school safety week. Mira never threw it out. Maybe she knew. Maybe something in her mother's gut had always believed this story wasn't done. Out on the porch, Luca settled onto the top step, legs dangling. Orion lay beside him, head on his paws, ears flicking with each sound of the neighborhood waking up again. Birdsong, a lawnmower far off, a child's laughter from next door, and no machines, no beeping, no alarms, no wires, just breath, just sunlight, just now. Mira sat behind them, arms wrapped around her knees. For a long time she didn't speak. Neither did Luca. Neither did Orion. It wasn't silence. It was peace. And then, finally, Mira leaned forward, whispering more to herself than to either of them. "He saved you." She reached out, stroked Orion's fur, her voice trembling now. "But he also brought me back too." Luca reached over, tiny hand resting on Orion's neck. The German shepherd closed his eyes, body relaxed but still alert, because that's who he was. Even in rest, he watched. The camera pulls back wide and steady. A porch, a boy, a mother, and a dog who had crossed earthquakes, hospital wards, and the silence between heartbeats to bring them all back home, together. Sometimes the ones who save us don't wear lab coats or speak in words. Sometimes they walk on four legs, guided only by loyalty, instinct, and love. Orion wasn't just a therapy dog. He was a silent sentinel, a bridge between worlds, reminding us that healing doesn't always begin with medicine. Sometimes it begins with trust, with watching, with listening. German shepherds like Orion serve beside us in war zones, disaster sites, hospitals, and homes. They don't ask for medals, just a place to stand, a life to guard. Luca's story is a tribute not only to one brave dog, but to every animal that chooses to stay, to wait, to fight for us, even when we've given up. May we honor them not just in stories, but in how we listen to their warnings and how we love them back. Because in the end, Orion didn't just save a boy. He reminded a whole world how to believe again.